Thank you very much for the welcome and for this opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity to return to Alma Mater in an official capacity. I do so with fond memories of many professors who are no longer pilgrims on the path to eternal life. However, I do have one former professor here, Dr. Margaret Shatkin, and I also see the man who was the president of the university when I graduated, Father Monin. So it's a privilege to have both of you here. As I passed by Gasson Hall just a few moments ago, I remembered Father Thayer, whose knowledge of Demosthenes was so profound that he used to translate his speeches as he walked around the room with the book still on his desk. Of course, I have been back for a few informal visits since my graduation in June of 1973, and I have seen many changes that were made to this campus. Unfortunately, I was unable to be present in 2003 when I was unworthily numbered among the distinguished alumni of this university. Life is indeed filled with unexpected events. I was pleased to see that one of the pictures announcing this lecture was taken from last Holy Thursday in Iraq, when I was washing the feet of some of the soldiers who make up the faithful that I serve. And that's something that obviously ritually expresses what we try to do, to meet the faithful where they are and express Christ's love. Gradually, we seek to deepen that love and to open those hearts to what is most profound and what is best, as the motto of this university says so well, ever to excel. When I left this campus 37 years ago, my path was fairly certain. You heard that I was on my way to Rome, to the seminary, to priesthood, and a lifetime of direct pastoral ministry in the Diocese of Cleveland. Never in my wildest dreams did I think of celebrating Holy Thursday on a military installation during a war in Iraq. Of the topics proposed for this lecture, I selected the rather ambitious suggestion of speaking about the importance of a Jesuit education as a formation for Christian living in our times. As you've just heard, I spent 15 years as a student in Jesuit education, institutions of higher education, 11 of them universities, so I suppose that I should be able to say something. Curiously enough, I discovered a very interesting link between Boston College and my present ministry, and that is, of the two first chaplains commissioned for service to Catholics in the United States Army, both of whom were Jesuits. One was John McElroy, who after his service in the Mexican-American War came and founded Boston College. We all know in what the hopes of the founders of the Catholic university system in the United States consisted. They sought excellence in learning and achievement, grounding of Catholic teaching and values in the young people who would form the next generations, reputable schools of theology for the training of priests, religious, and catechists, and places where an immigrant population would be welcome for higher study. It's not necessary to go back very far in time to see why that was necessary. In 1924 or 1925, my father, a student at Adelbert College of what was then Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, was told that people with vowels at the end of their names did not study there. It had no effect on a man profoundly committed to scholarship and fiercely proud of his Italian heritage. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa from that same university. However, it is not hard to imagine the effects of similar comments for men and women with less determination. Most institutions of higher learning in this country began as confessional institutions. Consequently, the missionaries and others who tended to the spiritual needs of the steadily growing Catholic population did not want to see Catholic doctrine diluted or attacked in the minds of the more promising Catholic young men and women fortunate enough to pursue further studies. The ideal of the Jesuit approach to education appears very clearly in the Ratio Studiorum of 1599. Therein can be found the methods and objectives used in the Jesuit colleges of Europe, Asia, and the American continent. Father William McGucklin, writing in his book, Jesuits and Education, says, almost against his will, St. Ignatius and his followers came to see the power of education. This would not be a cure for heresy, but a preventative of it. To save southern Germany for the Church, there was needed a genius like Peter Canisius, and even his heroic efforts were powerless to remedy all of the ravages wrought by heresy and worldly prelates. But once you get control of the youth, train them in right principles, impart to them at the same time an education the equal or superior of any in Europe, then the whole world is saved for the Church. End of the citation. The Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities made the following comment about the Ratio in 2005. While such a universal curriculum is impossible today, a systematically organized pedagogy whose substance and methods promote the explicit vision of the contemporary Jesuit educational mission is consistent with the Jesuit tradition. The tradition of Ignatian pedagogy is a process by which teachers accompany learners in the lifelong pursuit of competence, conscience, and compassionate commitment. Such an Ignatian pedagogical paradigm can help teachers and learners to focus their work in a manner that is academically sound and at the same time formative of persons for others. Since they launched their first school in 1548, the Jesuits have believed that a high-quality education is the best path to meaningful lives of leadership and service. They have understood that the liberal arts, the natural and social sciences, and the performing arts, joined with all the other branches of knowledge, were a powerful means to develop leaders with the potential for influencing and transforming society. Obviously, a prudent response to the times in which this philosophy operates has adjusted the understanding somewhat. The Jesuit Secondary School Association described its goal as a basic knowledge of the major doctrines and practices of the Catholic Church, adding that a graduate will also have examined his or her own religious feelings and beliefs with a view to choosing a fundamental orientation toward God and establishing a relationship with a religious tradition and or community. We live in an age of pluralism and transition. We are flooded with information. But what is its quality? What relationship does it have to the truth? How do we sift through these vast quantities of data to see what is useful, germane, and authentic? How do we distinguish between the clever soundbite, which may well distort the message, and the truth? Education is the key, and of course, a good education is based in that search for the truth. In preparation for the pastoral visit of Pope Benedict to the United States in 2008, Archbishop Wuerl invited me to participate in a press conference organized at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. One of the quotations that the Archbishop deftly passed to me was exactly how to avoid the tendency to reduce various papal messages to a series of sound bites. I dared to suggest that the mission was really in the hands of the newscasters and the journalists. It was their responsibility to look for and present the essence of his message. However, in responding to another question, I also mentioned that the Holy Father's message would be pastoral, eloquent, but also very clear and definite. The next morning, a noted Washington daily quoted me as saying that the Pope would have a clear and definite message, period, nothing else. My careful response had been reduced to a soundbite. Those who asked the question also reduced my reply to what they wanted to believe. The City Council of Washington, D.C. just enacted legislation that denies any reference to freedom of conscience beyond the First Amendment to the Constitution. In consequence, the Archdiocese of Washington had to make a threefold response: entrust its participation in the adoption of children to another agency, assert that spousal benefits would not be available for anyone hired after March 1st, and finally, encourage a test of this legislation. The alternative to the second element of the response would have been to abandon the social services offered to 68,000 of the city's poor. We all know that service to Christ in the poor is an essential element of the gospel we preach. The alternative to the third element would have been to act in disaccord with the gospel and perhaps give scandal. Some of the strongest words we hear in the gospel speak about the gravity of scandal. As St. Mark puts it, "But anyone who is the downfall of one of these little ones who have faith would be better thrown into the sea with a great millstone hung round his neck." It is almost as if we have returned to the earliest times of the history of the Church, when there is a dear price for fidelity to the gospel. And yet, as John Courtney Murray pointed out in 1960, this is the only nation founded on propositions held to be self-evident. The United States is founded on propositions held to be self-evident, not on ethnicity, not on a common language, not on any other thing that would normally determine the essence of a nation. I think it is precisely that fidelity to our Catholic institutions of higher learning were founded to protect through the clear presentation of our doctrine, some apologetics, and a clear expression of Catholic identity. As Pope John Paul II said in the document Ex Corde Ecclesiae, it is the honor and responsibility of a Catholic university to consecrate itself without reserve to the cause of truth. This is its way of serving at one and the same time both the dignity of the human person and the good of the Church, which has an intimate conviction that truth is its real ally, and that knowledge and reason are sure ministers to faith. Without in any way neglecting the acquisition of youthful knowledge, A Catholic university is distinguished by its free search for the whole truth about nature, about the human person, and about God. The present age is in urgent need of this kind of disinterested service, namely proclaiming the meaning of truth, that fundamental value without which freedom, justice, and human dignity are extinguished. By means of a kind of universal humanism, a Catholic university is completely dedicated to the research of all aspects of truth in their essential connection with the supreme truth, who is God. It does this without fear, but rather with enthusiasm, dedicating itself to every path of knowledge, aware of being preceded by Him who is the way, the truth, and the life, the Logos, whose spirit of intelligence and love enables the human person with his or her own intelligence to find the ultimate reality of which he is the source and end, and who alone is capable of giving fully that wisdom without which the future of the world would be in danger. End of the citation. How successful are we in reaching this goal? I remember in my years in Rome of meeting a young man who had come from Cleveland to see the city and knew someone I knew, and of course that's usually the beginning of taking someone around to see the sights. And he lamented that after 16 years at Catholic institutions, none Jesuit, I think, that he did not know the truths of his faith. He felt cheated. In fact, he began the question by asking, he said, "Do you know the Baltimore Catechism?" I said, "Of course. Would you like me to recite it for you?" And then he presented his concern. The recent CARA study from Georgetown University reports that 16% of students at Catholic colleges and universities become more pro-life and more convinced of traditional marriage, whereas 31% become more supportive of legal abortion and 39% approve of same-sex unions. Only 7% increase in attendance at religious services, while 32% reduce attendance. 8% of Catholic students seek practicing their faith while attending a Catholic institution. The declines are somewhat more significant at non-Catholic private or public institutions, but that news is not particularly consoling. Something clearly must be adjusted. Somehow there is much that we have lost in terms of our ability to transmit what we have received. I use the first person plural intentionally because the duty to pass on what we have received is incumbent upon all of those baptized into the Catholic faith. However, by the same token, we must not reduce the richness of our Catholic faith merely to certain important moral issues without including other criteria as well. While I do believe that we will be judged on our response to the little ones, the unborn and the aged, as well as on our defense of the natural law, the Gospel imparts clear moral teaching on a variety of topics. What are the results there? The Jesuit goal of forming persons for others should also be the object of a study. Do our institutions manage to excite our young people to consider lives which serve others? Are they inclined to participate in activities such as the Peace Corps, the Jesuit volunteers, or a host of other humanitarian and faith-based initiatives that seek to make the social teaching of the gospel a reality? The compendium of the social teaching of the Church reminds us of the importance of the Catholic nature of our message, Catholic with a small c. We cannot choose one over the other, but most must elect both. To quote the beginning of the compendium, this document is an act of service on the part of the Church to the men and women of our time, to whom she offers the legacy of her social doctrine, according to that style of dialogue by which God himself, in his only begotten Son, made man, and addresses human persons as his friends, and moves among them. Drawing inspiration from the pastoral constitution Gaudium et Spes, this document, too, places the human person considered whole and entire, with body and soul, heart and conscience, mind and will, as the key to its whole exposition. In this perspective, the Church is inspired by no earthly ambition and seeks but one solitary goal: to carry forward the work of Christ himself under the lead of the befriending Spirit. For Christ entered this world to bear witness to the truth, to save, and not to sit in judgment, to serve, and not to be served. I think that publication of the social compendium, or the compendium of the social doctrine of the Church, is a landmark in the development of our understanding of that social teaching. I know, because of where I was at the time that it was prepared, or being prepared, that it was the result of 4 drafts. It was the result of great study and rewriting in order to try to express adequately what that social dimension of the gospel is. I noticed, too, when speaking with a member of the diplomatic service of the Holy See, not too long after the terrible destruction of the earthquake in Haiti, his ready praise for the speed of the response of the United States to the humanitarian needs in that situation. I did not press the issue, because I, too, spent a quarter of a century as a diplomat, but I could not fail to observe that many who often criticize the foreign policy and the military of this country at least recognize its preparation and its ability to respond to urgent humanitarian situations with enviable speed. They are able to do that because they are prepared. While the men and women whom I am now privileged to serve are remarkable for their devotion to duty, their professionalism, and their courage, this is not the time or the place to examine U.S. foreign policy. It is perhaps, however, a propitious occasion to consider how we as Catholics intend to shape the future of this nation. The Council insisted that the laity is the leaven called to permeate society. As the document on the laity states, they exercise the apostolate, in fact, by their activity, directed to the evangelization and sanctification of men, and to the penetrating and perfecting of the temporal order through the Spirit of the gospel. Certainly, a very tall order, but obviously not impossible. Having spent all but 2 years outside of the United States from my graduation from BC in 1973 until my return in 2008, I could not help but notice how much harsher has contemporary public discourse become. Civility has often dissolved into an exercise of shrill name-calling and ad hominem attacks. I personally cannot believe that as a society we are not able to do better. It is true that during my years as an undergraduate student on this campus, tempers flared. I arrived here in the fall of 1970, just after the double strikes had paralyzed the university. Opposition to the war in Vietnam was intense, and countercultural initiatives were everywhere apparent. It was not an easy time. Perhaps it was my youth, but somehow there seemed to be a little bit more willingness to limit discussion to the issues and to give the benefit of the doubt and to dialogue. Perhaps, too, my present pastoral responsibilities make me more sensitive to the importance of a society which welcomes others. Our returning troops are afflicted with the effects of post-traumatic syndrome. Their families are frequently in disarray. And regardless of our position on the current wars, we have an obligation to participate in the healing process. The obligation certainly comes from our baptism, but also from our humanity. If we are effectively persons for others, we cannot remain indifferent to the fact that we have lost more brothers and sisters to suicide than to combat since the invasion of Iraq. We have failed in some way to respond to their hopelessness. We have not made manifest our light in the darkness of their experience. To quote again the compendium of the social doctrine of the Church, the Church journeys along the roads of history together with all humanity. Even if not of the world, she lives in the world and is called to serve the world according to her innermost vocation. This attitude is based on the deep conviction that just as it is important for the world to recognize the Church as a reality of history and as a leaven in history, so too it is important for the Church to recognize that she has received from history and from the development of the human race. The Second Vatican Council gave an eloquent demonstration of solidarity, respect, and affection for the whole human family by engaging in dialogue with it about many problems, bringing the light kindled from the gospel, and putting at the disposal of the human race the saving resources which the Church has received from her founder under the promptings of the Holy Spirit. It is man himself who must be saved. It is human society which must be renewed. The end of the citation. I have often spoken and written about the importance of a Catholic response to this situation of darkness. Renewal and the eagerness to stretch out a welcoming hand to a brother and sister in need are indeed hallmarks of the Catholic tradition. They are the lived gospel, which identifies Christ in the needy person whose path crosses ours. The parochial school system, our Catholic high schools and universities, were built by an immigrant people ready to sacrifice their nickels and dimes for a higher goal, eager to participate in the goal, larger than their own limited vision, and filled with a zeal for Jesus Christ. They learned that selfishness at the knees of parents imbued with the faith of their Catholic heritage. If anything, the recent debate about health care has brought to the forefront once again the tremendous contribution made by Catholic hospitals to the treatment and service of the poor in our cities. Father Kolvenbach, the former Superior General of the Society of Jesus, said it well. We aim to form leaders in service, men and women of compassionate commitment. The Catechism of the Catholic Church clearly states the importance of the total program of teaching and a lived faith. While not being formally identified with them, catechesis is built on a certain number of elements of the Church's pastoral mission, which have a catechetical aspect, that prepare for catechesis or spring from it. That is, the initial proclamation of the gospel, or that missionary preaching to arouse faith, the examination of the reasons for belief, the experience of Christian living, and the celebration of the sacraments, and finally integration into the ecclesial community and apostolic and missionary witness. The theme of that paragraph is continued in the next. Catechesis is intimately bound up with the whole of the Church's life, not only her geographical extension and numerical increase, but even more, her inner growth and correspondence with God's plan depend essentially on catechesis. I submit that the importance of the Society of Jesus in this task cannot be exaggerated. On the occasion of the 35th General Council of the Society in 2008, Pope Benedict XVI sent a letter to the then Father General, Father Kolvenbach, in which he said, among other things, to serve as a soldier of God beneath the banner of the cross, and to serve the Lord alone and the Church, his spouse, under the Roman Pontiff, the Vicar of Christ on earth. This is a particular fidelity, sanctioned for many of you by a vow of immediate obedience to the successor of Peter. Today, the Church is still particularly in need of this fidelity of yours, which constitutes the badge of your order, in an age when the urgent need is felt to pass on its integral form to our contemporaries, who are distracted by so many discordant voices, the one unchanged message of salvation, which is the gospel, not as the word of men, but as it truly is, the word of God, which is at work in you believers. Certainly, in my years at Boston College, that selfless dedication was evident in many of the older Jesuits who had been expelled from the mission in Iraq. They recalled with fondness their time there. They gave of themselves as teachers and tutors, even in their later years. I saw that same dedication again in the professors at the Gregorian University, which, if any of the Jesuit fathers here have ever seen the living conditions in the Gregorian University, they recognize what that sacrifice means. The director of my doctoral dissertation was the rector of the university, and on a few occasions we met in his, I guess, cell would be the only appropriate term to use, which was one room with bookcases, a bed, and a sink. And yet, he spent most of his life teaching there at the Gregorian. I would be remiss if I did not reiterate my own gratitude to the Jesuits I have had as teachers, spiritual directors, mentors, and those I count as friends. We do not always agree, but they have never failed to provoke reflection, ask the difficult question, or respond to the current situation. Theirs is also the charism of teaching us to ask the difficult question and devote time to research. I remember well long hours in the Baptist library, which was the only library at that time, in an attempt to fulfill that expectation. To quote the Holy Father's letter once again, the continuity of the teachings of the successors of Peter demonstrates the great care and attention that they show for the Jesuits, their esteem for you, and their desire always to be able to count on the Society's precious contribution to the life of the Church and the evangelization of the world. Again, thank you for the invitation to return to this campus and for your kind attention.